Hey all. So I'm doing something a little bit different today, and I wanted to talk about two sort of similar books that I loved, and I think they're very different, despite the fact that they're also very similar. Um, so the books are The Secret History by Donna Tartt and If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio, and these are both dark academia. The Secret History sort of like known as being like I don't know if it's the first, but sort of the top premier sort of dark academia, and If We Were Villains is newer. So I'm going to kind of walk through them because they're very similar structurally and plot-wise, but I found them very different in terms of like thematically and how the characters work, and I loved both of them, and I kind of wanted to go through them and how I think they're different, and why I liked both of them and why I think they, stand separately while also being similar. So if this is the kind of stuff, if you've liked one, you may like the other, but they are dramatically different. So I'm going to start with The Secret History because that's kind of the big one. And it's a fairly hefty book. I mean, I think, like 600 and something pages, and it's not, I mean, I actually found it pretty fast-paced, but it's literary fiction, so it's not, like, speeding along. There is a sort of crime element, but that's not really it's not plot-driven. It's very character-driven. So, The Secret History takes place in the 80s, or late 80s, early 90s, at a small sort of elite, well, I wouldn't say it's even elite, but a small college in Vermont. And if it may not be elite, but it's very like academic. And in terms of the fact that it's based on Donna Tartt. She went to Bennington College, which is and I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there are other colleges around the country, but this is a thing in New England. We have these sort of, you make your own major, you set up your own program. It's a very sort of exploratory kind of academic program versus like very traditional, like this is your major and this is what you. So there's a lot of colleges in New England that kind of have this, and this is one of those. And so it's it's really, I want to say, like, it's unique, it's academic. You have to be somewhat, self-motivated because you actually have to have, like, a goal, to kind of, but it's also very, like, we just love to learn kind of thing. So it's a very, like, I don't want to say it's elite, but, it has that very, like, academic environment. So this is about a group of college kids, and they're in their, like, later years, so, like, junior and senior years of college, and they're all part of this, like, I don't want to say, like, exclusive, but, fairly exclusive, classics program. So, and the professor who teaches classics only selects, like, a certain number of students. He's very particular. It's basically this group of students, and then our narrator gets kind of brought into this group. But it's fairly exclusive, and the people, like the kids who take this program, they take all their classes with this professor except for like a handful of others. So, they're pretty much like in a very insulated sort of bubble, even though they're on this college campus. And so it's not like a massive college. It's a fairly small college. And on top of that, they're in this very, like, insulated sort of group. And essentially, most of the characters are relatively well off, or they act well off, even if they're not. So one is very, very wealthy. Another one's pretty wealthy. And then some are not, but, like, they definitely live, like, wealthy. And, so, like, again, there's still, like, a class distinction in there, but these are, fairly wealthy, highly educated, group of students. And one of the characters is, I mean, so again, these classic students, they're not very likable. They're kind of despicable people, and so Donna Tartt went to college and dated Bret Easton Ellis. And if you like early Bret Easton Ellis, like Less Than Zero, American Psycho, Rules of Attraction, you can see a lot of similarities. You can see a lot of the style. I think because he published those, I think he published all three before she even published this one. I do think her writing is a little more refined, more mature, but very similar themes in rich people kind of being bored and having the world at their disposal, essentially. And so for a series of reasons, this group, minus the narrator, takes part in this thing, and essentially they commit a crime. And one of the other people who also wasn't part of it finds out. And so he's essentially blackmailing them and kind of threatening to go public with this, knowing about their crime. So they set out, and this is not really a spoiler because it's pretty clear early on. So they set out, to get their revenge, essentially. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but yeah. And so basically, the first half of the book is leading up to this series of crimes. And then the second half is kind of the repercussions of the crimes. And it's very, it's actually really, really funny, but, dark funny. Very black comedy, very dark comedy. There's some, there's definitely some emotional stuff, but I think they're so detached from, what they're doing that it's, they're these very unlikable people who are essentially committing crimes, and they, for the most part, don't really have any sort of reaction to these things they're doing. It's, just a thing they do, and it's not, there's that, sort of, elite, snooty, rich person, ennui, and again, that, I know that that's not necessarily appealing to a lot of people, but it's very intriguing, if nothing else. I don't think the characters are likable, but they're interesting, and so you definitely are, engaged, and you want to read more of them because they're really well fleshed out, intriguing people, even if they're not people you'd actually want to know because they're very unlikable. So this book, so again, this is about a series of a group of people, and there's a crime, and then they're covering for it, and so plot wise, that's the plot. But really, I think it's it's a study of sort of how people handle certain things. It's a class commentary. It's also sort of social class, but also intellectual class. And then this group of people are very interested in aesthetics. So it's all about kind of appearances and how they're perceived, and there's a lot of that. It's very cold, kind of calculated, and again, if you've read American Psycho or seen American Psycho, I mean, it's that without the sort of over the top violence. A lot of similar concepts and themes, and again, I think you can tell they were in the same world. They knew each other. They are friends. You can see that, that they're writing from the world. So again, I mean, and this is also timing, it's late 80s, early 90s. That was kind of culturally what was going on. So If We Were Villains then is about same thing, where it's about a group of students. They're in their second, third and fourth year of this. And this is it's an arts academy, sort of conservatory kind of place, and they are the group of theater students. And so they are, it's a very, exclusive. They're, again, they're sort of in a bubble. They communicate, just like in Secret History, sometimes, the characters communicate with each other in Greek. And they make references to classics and to, literature that they're reading. The same goes on in If We Were Villains, except they're communicating in, Shakespeare quotes, because they're studying Shakespeare, and they do all these Shakespeare plays. And so it's a similar plot, where basically there is a crime, and it's a little bit more of a mystery. So If We Were Villains is framed by the person who has gone to prison for the crime, the cop basically being I want to know the real story, what really happened. And so it has the same, the narrator's kind of removed from the events and kind of looking back, so you have that element. And then again, you have the sort of elite group, you have the very insulated, sort of exclusive group of people. It's a handful of people, there's a crime, the characters are structurally kind of similar. You have one, the more arrogant, you have the sort of the female character who's kind of the narrator's kind of obsessed with. And but I think the biggest difference to me is, whereas the motivations in Secret History are very much on that we're bored, we're rich, we're better than other people, and what if we committed a crime and I bet we could get away with it. We're smarter than other people. We can buy our way out of things. We're bored. If We Were Villains, it's very much a crime of passion, and it's driven by passions. And I think because these are theater students, it's more, the commentary is less on, it's similar in the fact that this kind of, society where you get trapped, where Donna Tartt is commenting about people who are obsessed with aesthetics and beauty and lose all sense of reality. It's kind of in If We Were Villains, these are very artistic people, and they, in a sense, lose concept of reality as well, because they're kind of on that fine line and that boundary between passionate exploration of art versus reality. And so they think in such passionate, over the top ways that they sometimes lose touch with how normal people think, that everything isn't artistic and isn't immediate and urgent in the way that it is when you're creating art. And so I really liked both, because I think they both have a lot of commentary on how we look at things, how we interact with our own what we're kind of involved in, our society, the way we're looking at things, kind of isolating, when you're isolated and in a group of people, how you kind of lose touch with what's sort of normal and what normal people do. Secret History, like I said, is kind of more darkly funny with a little bit of sadness. If We Were Villains is very emotional. And it I thought it was very painful, emotionally. But they're both very, very good. And so, I think that's the biggest difference, where one is kind of cold, one is overly passionate. And so in both kind of situations, you have someone who's so removed from their feelings versus someone who's so in tune with their feelings that they both are sort of in a kind of dangerous situation. You have these, the groups of characters. And so I really enjoyed both of them. I love both of them. These are easily 5-star reviews. These are two of the better books I've read all year. If We Were Villains, on a personal level, I think meant more to me. Just because I was a theater kid and I was an English major, and it just connected. I connected more to the personally to the story. I think Secret History is better written. Again, they're both well written, but in terms of like literary merit, Secret History, I think, has a little more like just potency in terms of the writing. But I do think they stand very separately. I know a lot of people have said like, oh, I read If We Were Villains right after I read Secret History, or I read Secret History right after If We Were Villains, and they were too similar. I read If We Were Villains in February, and I just read Secret History this month. So, or maybe I read it in February, I believe, early in February. So it's only been like a month and a half since I read basically both of them. And so I don't know that that's necessarily the case, but again, if you, depending on how much you're reading and how much you like this kind of content, they may be very similar, so maybe separate them. But I highly recommend reading both of them. I loved both of them, and I think they're both exceptional. And I have Donna Tartt's other two books, and ML Rio has another book coming out this year, so I'm kind of excited to, explore more of their writing. So, let me know if you've read either of these, if you have any feelings on them. Like I said, I think they're both really, really good. So, all right, bye.